Hello and welcome back to another episode of Keep It Fictional from the Port Moody Public Library. I am here again with my book friends Emma, Corinne, and Sadie. Now, a week ago, I saw an article that is titled The Best Books We Have Read in 2024. And I was just like, that seems premature to say that there's the best books already because it's only April. New Yorker, what are you doing? I mean, I'm sure Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange is great, but really, like April, you're calling it already? And more importantly, you haven't heard about all the books we're going to talk about today just yet. Because this is our second most anticipated book episodes. We're going to be talking about books that are coming out in May, June, July, and August that we think have the potential, at least, to become our favorite books, our top books of the year, if we read them. So yeah. And we have about 20 books to tell you about today. So get your pen and paper ready, open your Goodreads app, get your library catalog app ready so they can put some holds on these amazing titles that are coming out soon. So because there are so many books, let's get started. We are going to start first with Miss Corinne, who apparently has ranked their most anticipated reads.
You know how much I love to rank things. You know how much I love to put things and judge them and put them exactly where they deserve. And so I think that this book is very much a five. A five, if we're doing 5-1, which I will be. Book friends, you can do whatever you want, but this is what I'm doing. In that I am super looking forward to it, kind of more than your average book, but it's not a number one. I think I'm going to really enjoy it, but I don't think it's going to be life-changing, which now I realize makes that sound really quite awful before I'm about to start trying to hype up this book. But I don't know that this book necessarily needs a lot of hype because those who are in the know and looking forward to it are already really looking forward to it. So one of my favorite podcasts to listen to that I think has been going on for 14 years, which neither the host nor the listeners really want to examine too far, which I absolutely understand. It is a insider's gleeful celebration of terrible movies. And as a connoisseur of terrible movies, I do think that maybe Face Off is the greatest movie ever made. And the only movies that I go to see in theaters are the Fast and Furious movies because I think they are cinema. I'm never going to watch Oppenheimer, but I have seen Con Air twice. These are people who are my people. And on their podcast, they joyfully dissect and ask the question that honestly they never answer of how did this get made? This is a collection of three friends, Paul Scheer, his wife Jungeun Rayfield, who is also an actor on things like Grace and Frankie, and Jason Mantzoukas, who is also an actor who is recently on the Percy Jackson series. So they are actors and writers. They are in the industry, and they love to talk about bad movies. Some of them so bad they're good, and some of them so bad they're just bad, except for Face Off, which is a masterpiece. And so Paul Scheer, who hosts the podcast or is one of the tri-hosts, do you co-host if there's only two of you? Are we co-hosts or are we quad hosts? Anyways, not important. Often regales us with tales of his childhood, which sounds harrowing, really harrowing, but in a kind of funny, loving way, like the time that he tried to French kiss his mom after watching an episode of The Love Boat, or when he used to come home from work and fix himself a nice Clamato juice and sit down and talk to his grandma about the rough day that he had at the office. Or the time that his stepfather kidnapped possums and then put them on the porch for Halloween. And so the kids would come up to trick or treat and they'd have all these possums rattling at their cage trying to get out. Yeah, the more you learn about Paul's childhood, the more you want to learn. And so he has kind of indulged the fans in a book that has already received a book list and Kirkus star, which is called Joyful Recollections of Trauma by Paul Scheer, which I am sure, because he is a comedian, because he is a writer, and because we've had a little taste of how wild his childhood is, I think that it will be great for fans of the show, fans of his work, or just people who enjoy a good kind of like examination of your childhood trauma and you kind of came out on the other end of it after you dealt with it with a lot of therapy. So that is my number 5 pick. Okay, I'm going to go to Emma. Emma, what is your 5 but not 5 pick?
I was not like Corinne. I did not rank mine. So mine are just kind of in a random order here. But my number one, not number 5, my first that I'm sharing today, my first pick for today, comes to no surprise to anyone that the first book on my anticipated list is the new upcoming volume of Yona of the Dawn, the manga series that I talked about in last week's episode. So if you listen to that episode where we discussed genre mashups, then you already know that all about my love for this genre-breaking manga series. If you haven't listened to that episode, Yona of the Dawn is about a spoiled princess named Yona, whose life is shattered by the violent assassination of her father, the king of a country called Koka, by her beloved cousin Suwon. So Suwon assassinates her father and then takes over Koka, becomes the new king. Yona and her bodyguard Hawk are forced to flee the capital after Hawk is accused of killing the king, and Suwon and his soldiers begin to hunt down Yona and her friends, the only challengers to his claim to the throne. Jump forward 40 volumes, and the kingdom of Koka is at war with a neighboring nation called the Kai Empire. The Kai Empire is gradually trying to annex more and more of Koka, but Koka's army, with Yona strategizing, is able to keep them at bay. Kai's soldiers are violent and deadly, much like their ruthless emperor Chagol. And a former Kai general and a concubine of the emperor's named Mainyan, I never know how to say it correctly, Mainyan, has fled Kai to find refuge within Koka. Mainyan becomes close friends with Yona and her group, who devote themselves to protecting her from Emperor Chagol's grasp. When Mainyan is kidnapped by Chagol's minions and taken back to Kai's camps, Yona and Hawk and the 4 dragon warriors, the beautiful dragon boys I hyped up last week, must then infiltrate the camps to rescue her. So the past few volumes of this series have been documenting the war with the Kai Empire. So the story at this point is a bit more focused on war strategy and action than some of the previous volumes. There have been a lot of long battle sequences featuring characters from all 5 of Koka's tribes. And since all of the main characters have finally gathered in one location, including the highly anticipated reunion of Yona and Suwon, because they haven't seen each other since that first volume, the suspense is really high, and it feels like the series is kind of reaching that climax. It's reaching that like emotional point. So this new volume is a continuation of the Yona of the Dawn series, but I've been waiting to read these next chapters since volume 40 was released back in December. So I and many other Yona of the Dawn fans cannot wait for the new volume to be released this upcoming May. And then I will pass it along to Sadie. I want to hear what Sadie's looking forward to.
All right. So I have 4 books that I have known that I'm looking forward to for a very long time. And then I have one that, to be honest with you, I kind of had to search for last night. Just kind of search through things that were coming out because I didn't really have a 5th book that I was really, really excited about. And so the one that I chose is called The Sins of On Their Bones, and it's by Laura R. Samotin. And it is a fantasy, queer romance, Jewish historical fiction is kind of how it is categorized. And it follows Dmitry Alexeyev. Dmitry Alexeyev. And Dmitry used to be the Tsar of Novosviseo. But now he is in exile because he has lost a horrible, horrible civil war. To make matters worse, the civil war was kind of instigated by his estranged husband, Alexei Balakin. Not good situation. So now Dmitry is in hiding. The only person that he has left of his court is his spy master, Vasily. And the two of them are planning on sneaking back into Alexi's court under false identities to gather information and try to figure out how they can take down Alexi. But things are not always what they seem. Alexi is not as easy to kill as they might have anticipated. And so they're kind of trying to learn how they can go about getting back into the court and figuring out how they can reclaim, how Dimitri can reclaim his kingdom. There's romance in it. There is kind of intrigue. There's spies, which I always appreciate a good spy story. I love a good spy story. And so I think it hits a lot of the boxes, but I am putting it, I guess I am kind of ranking it because I am putting it a little bit in my fifth position because I wasn't as excited about this one as some of the other ones that I do have on my list. But that is coming out May 7th, and it is The Sins on Their Bones by Laura R. Samotin. All right, Virginia, tell us what your number 5 or not number 5 pick is.
Yeah, so definitely not rank here. But I am here to highlight some books in translation and some books from my favorite publishers. And of course, I have to start with a Japanese book in translation, which of course dear and near to my heart. There's actually quite a few Japanese books in translation coming out, and some of them are new authors. I'm really, really quite excited about that. We got Takaoka's Travels by Tatsuhiko Shibusawa, and translated by David Boyle. It's pitched as Shibusawa is pitched as Japan's Italo Calvino. So with that comparison, you know that I'm gonna just have to read it. It's about a prince pilgrimage to India, and I can't wait to see what kind of places they visit. There's also Goodnight Tokyo by Atsuhiro Yoshida and translated by Hayden Trowell. It's a set of interconnected stories that take place over a few nights in Tokyo, and they talk about sort of the intimacy and the isolation in a big city like that. So I love connected stories. So really, really looking forward to that. There's also Mysterious Setting by Katsushige Abe, translated by Michael Emberidge. It is another one of those Pushkin Japanese novella series. Same publisher with Harlequin Butterfly. And I read that one already. It is so much fun. So I could have talked about all of those, but there are two powerhouse women's writers coming out with new books this year. So I'm going to have to talk about one of them. And she is, of course, Yoko Ogawa, author of The Memory Police, which I talk about way, way, way back on this podcast. Love, love, love that book. And her new book is called Mina's Matchbox, and it's translated also by Stephen B. Snyder, one of her longtime translator. It is a slice of life kind of story. So I saw from early reviewers that there's not much plot to it. So it's going to be for readers who don't mind reading sort of vignettes of a character's life. This is a story of Tomoko. And when she was 12 years old, her father died, and she ends up moving in for a year with her aunt and uncle. They lived in a coastal town named Ashiya, which I've never been to. And this is also a very different kind of life for her because her aunt and uncle are super rich. They live in this giant mansion. It has 17 rooms. It's filled with fancy imported furniture. It's got a sprawling garden outside with plants from any plants that you can think of. And they used to even have a zoo. And now most of the animals are gone, but they still have a pygmy hippo as a pet. That's the hippo that you saw on the cover of the book. And Tomoko is slowly getting drawn into this new family and slowly get to know some of their secrets. Their relatives, her uncle, who's not Japanese, but the president of a big company. And he's often absent for no reason, and I'm not really sure where he disappeared to. Then there is her aunt, who seems to have everything that anyone could ever want in life, but doesn't always seem to be very happy. And then there's the German great aunts of hers who keep telling her about these stories from the war. And of course, there is her cousin Mina, whom Tomoko became fast friends with. And they spend a lot of time talking about secret crushes, talking about making up like elaborate stories. And from Tomoko's eyes, we see the complications of a world that is changing. In the 70s, when there's lots of changes in Japan, we get to see it through her eyes. We get to see it through how complicated being an adult is, and also a family that is on the verge of collapse. Ogawa's work has been described as dreamlike, effortless, glassy, and that has a eerie brilliance. And I do really, think that those are really good descriptors of her work. I always feel like when I was reading her books that it's almost like you're watching these characters from a bit from a distance. You're kind of kept at bay, but yet you could also feel every single emotion and tension in the air. And it's just the way she so eloquently and elegantly, like describe her characters in her prose. I read The Housekeeper and The Professor recently, and I feel like this one was going to get sort of that same vibe. Maybe not so much like Memory Police with some sort of stranger things going on, but probably more like The Housekeeper and The Professor, if you know that one. So yeah, so really looking forward to this. And before I start just talking about more Japanese books and naming every single one that is coming out, I should pass it on to the next person. I think we are going to go back to Sadie just for surprise.
Excellent. All right. So from here on out, I am very excited about all of the books that I'm going to talk about. Not to say I wasn't about my first one, but they're all by authors that I've read before and authors that I love. There is one sequel that I'm going to talk about that I've been waiting for many, many years. So I'm very excited about that one. But first, I'm going to talk about an author who actually featured on my last most anticipated list as well, and that's Kate Quinn. The last one, she had co-written The Phoenix Crown with Janie Chang. And this time I'm going to be talking about the Briar. I'm going to turn my microphone so it doesn't fall. This time I'm going to be talking about the Briar Club. This book comes out July 9th, and it takes place in Washington, D.C., post-World War II in 1950. And it revolves around the Briarwood House, which is a boarding house for women. And it kind of follows the story of all of the different women who are living in this boarding house and their different kind of the secrets that they're keeping and the lives that they're living. And it focuses mainly around mysterious widow Grace March. And she moves into this boarding house. And as she moves in, she kind of starts to draw these women together a little bit. Up until this point, they had always kept very much to themselves. Kind of a nod in passing, but that was pretty much it. But when Grace moves into the boarding house, she starts to host these kind of dinner parties and these afternoons up in her attic house. And she starts to bring these women together and kind of have these very different personalities who are coming together. You have Fliss, who is kind of puts out the facade of being the perfect wife and the perfect mother. But there's a lot of internal kind of trauma that she's dealing with, a lot of wounds that she's still struggling with. You have the police officer's daughter, Nora, who, as you kind of learn more, learn that she's actually caught up with a very shadowy kind of gangster type person. You have the frustrated baseball star B, who, as the League of Their Own has taught us, women's baseball was very popular until World War II ended. And then all the men came back and started playing again, and the women's league disappeared. And so B is in kind of the midst of that and figuring out what she can do now that her career as a baseball player is over. And then you have Arlene, who is very kind of gung-ho and very much has fallen into and thrown herself into McCarthy's Red Scare. And so she is kind of almost poisoning the group with these ideas and these thoughts. And so it kind of revolves around this group of women and their weekly kind of dinner parties and their meetings. And as the story goes on, as I said, all of the secrets kind of start to come out, and they're kind of brought to head when something horrible and violent happens in the house, and the women kind of have to figure out if they can trust each other, if they can support each other, and if they do have someone in the midst in their boarding house who is responsible for this violence. So I've loved Kate Quinn's work in the past. She always does either kind of post-war books, but also spends quite a bit of time in the book looking back onto the war, which I think that this one is probably going to do as well, as we learn more about the women and how they sort of got to the place that they are at. So that is one I'm really excited about. The Briar Club by Kate Quinn, coming out July 9th. All right, we're going to head over to Corrine next. What is your number 4 rated book, Corrine?
Exactly. And it's exactly number 4 on my list as ranked. So in 2011, 3 successful and highly educated women fell in love with Ethan Schumann. One of those was Anna Akbari, who has a PhD or a doctorate in sociology, is a professor who has taught at New York University, an author. And she, like these 2 other women, fell in love with his charm, his wit, his personality as they exchanged messages online. They stayed up late having these text conversations. They really got into deep matters of life and felt a strong connection with this stranger that they had never met. And when they attempted to kind of take their relationship into the real world, his excuses of why it could never happen seemed plausible. His webcam was broken. There were last minute changes at work. His flight got canceled, all the normal things that you could absolutely excuse from someone that you really felt like understood you on a deeper level. And there were really no red flags. Ethan never asked for money. He wasn't saying, oh, I need 5 gift cards from Amazon desperately to pay my rent. No, it was just conversation. It was just the connection. They were all looking for love. All that he asked from them was their time, their emotions, and intimacy. But then things started to sound a little inconsistent. And these 3 women, who again were highly educated, started to dig a little bit deeper. Who really was Ethan? And in their search, they actually found each other. Sorry, this is just wild. Still all in a relationship, an online relationship with Ethan. And as they started to unpick their relationship with him, they discovered that it was part of a greater conspiracy. This is the upcoming true crime book, There Is No Ethan, by Anna Akbari. She is both one of the victims and an observer of the entire phenomenon. She and her fellow co-conspirators tracked down exactly who this person was and what they were doing. This is kind of like a gray area of even whether it is a crime or a not. Because, of course, according to the police or any authorities, no crime was ever committed. No money changed hands. Nothing was really at stake. And yet there is something at stake in this world of kind of like online relationships and deceiving people. And to what end? Because Akbari is a sociologist, she also delves into the mind of a catfisher, what makes them do the things that they do. I am extremely excited about this book because I am curious to kind of delve into the psychology of someone who decides to spend their time doing this, because like we don't have time. We have to make like dinner every night. There's like books to read and shows to watch, and like I got laundry that I need to fold, and like I don't have time for that. Who has time to juggle 3 online relationships with total strangers in different time zones? Like who's got the time and the energy? So I'm gonna find out when I read my number 4 ranked book. There Is No Ethan, by Dr. Anna Akbari. And I'm going to pass it over, as is tradition, to Emma.
All right, my number 2 on my totally not ranked list of books. This next book here is from Caitlin Press, which is a small publisher based out of Qualicum Beach, BC, which is just north of Nanaimo. So it's a little local, if you consider the island local. And Caitlin Press commits itself to publishing bold works by and about BC women, and a smaller imprint under Caitlin Press called Dagger Editions is dedicated solely to works by queer women. So obviously kind of something that would appeal to me or draw my attention in. So the book that I've chosen from this publishing company is a collection of short stories by an author that I haven't read before. But based on what I've read, she sounds like someone that I would be really into. Her name is Barbara Black, and the stories are called Little Fortified Stories. So according to the publisher's website, it's described as a new collection of short stories that are filled with wit, wonder, and weirdness from an award-winning flash fiction writer. And as many of you know by now, I tend to gravitate towards things that are kind of in the weird, the magical realism, and like softer science fiction. And I also really enjoy literary fiction and short story collections. So I'm excited to see what Black's new book has to offer. Little Fortified Stories will feature what's described as a microcosm of characters that defy conventions. There will be a spinster in love with a tobacco smoking ghost, a lonely one-eyed monster wandering in the desert, alcoholic spirits, a medieval saint, among many other wacky and absurd characters. And these inventive stories are inspired by art, by music, and by what the publishing website calls fabrications from the author's own ancestry. So I'm interested to see what that means. And Black's writing is described as quirky, as poetic, with a precise eye for both the absurd and the tragic. And as a flash fiction writer, these stories will be very, very short. So I'm thinking that they would probably make a great way for tackling a reading slump. If you're interested in something that's kind of quick and easy and consumable, then this might be something that you'd want to check out. So if you're similar to me and you enjoy books that are a bit absurd, if you enjoy magical realism or surrealism, and especially books by local BC authors and about local BC women's experiences, then you should check out Little Fortified Stories, which is coming out, I think, sometime in May. Couldn't find an exact date, but sometime in May. And I think we're looping back around to Virginia. What book do you have next?
That all sound great. That all sound great. So my next book, speaking of the memory police, it's been compared. My next book is compared to that title, and also Han Kan's Human Acts. And I believe Han Kan also actually wrote an introduction to this book. Sort of similar to Emma, one of my favorite types of stories, as you know, is the ones that kind of like are set in like our world. Everything is very familiar, except that there's just one thing that is slightly off, something strange, something supernatural, something fantastical, something surreal. And it draws you in, those stories draws you in with this like weird, strange premise, and then you sort of trap you there and catch you by surprise by a very in-depth, heartbreaking, devastating kind of exploration of like the human condition or some bigger issues. And an example that immediately came to mind, of course, is The Thing Between Us by Gus Moreno, which I love, love, love. A haunted smart speaker story turns into this like heartbreaking story about grief. So it's stories like that that I really, really enjoy. And I think this one is going to be similar to that. So this is a Korean book in translation. It is called 100 Shadows by Hwang Yong-eun, and it's translated by I try to look up the pronunciations of all these authors, and there's nothing to be found on YouTube. So I think translated by Yewon, and I'm terribly sorry for mispronouncing all of that. But it's a book that has been out in the UK for a couple years now, and is finally being published in North America. So super, super excited about that. To the people outside, the electronics market in Seoul is just a slum. It's full of shops that are cluttered with old, obsolete electronics and appliances and parts that surely no one wants anymore. You just go buy a new one. It's full of buildings that are bound to be destroyed and rebuilt with something newer, something better. It's just inevitable that these buildings are not long for this world. And it makes sense. They don't belong to our world anymore. They belong in the past. But what about the people inside? The people who live inside, the people who work inside. This electronics market is their home. Even that word slum. As our two main characters, Ungo and Muje, try to test that word out, say it out loud, roll it around their tongue a few times. Slum, slum, slum. It just doesn't sound right to describe their home. Our two main characters met in the electronics market. They work in the two different repair shops, and they have started going out. And it's been a few years that they've seen these notices about redevelopments. And because they've been up for a while, people kind of ignore it, and, they ask their owners and they're like, nothing's going to happen. It's fine. But lately, it seems like there's more and more talk about it. And it just seems like something is going to happen. Something is going to go down. But it's not just the demolition of their buildings that they are concerned about. There's another strange thing that are happening to the residents there. People's shadows, they start rising up. They start leaving their bodies. Nobody really knows why this is happening, but the only thing they know is that if that happens to you, you have to stand firm. You have to resist following your shadow, because if you don't, you may also disappear. Inspired by a true event in 2009, the Yongsan disaster, where a bunch of residents staged a sit-in protest in a temporary building when their building was going to be redeveloped. They were attacked by police. They were attacked by these private security guards. And the building caught on fire and they killed 6 people and injured more than 20 of them. And the author has been known as a champion of sort of the voice of these marginalized people, the people who have no voice, the people who have been forgotten, a people that don't fit into that shiny new image that the country is trying to project to the world. A country who's obsessed with development, obsessed with change. And she's trying to highlight from this working class perspective what it's like to live in a capitalist society and the people that have faded away from our consciousness. I think this book will appeal to some of the books that I think Miss Corinne has talked about on this show, like Tokyo Ueno Station, Denison Avenue, that type of stories where you really give a voice to people who don't have one and who may not have been represented in some of the stories. So if that sounds like the type of book that you might be interested in, I would highly recommend you to check out 100 Shadows. And speaking of Miss Corinne, I guess we can go over to her and see what book she's got for us.
Yeah. So my number 3 book, although Virginia, that book is absolutely on it is not in my top 5, but I knew it would be covered by you, so thank you. My number 3 is going to be a pretty harsh tone shift, because it's a romance book. And I am very excited about this particular book because its author is one of the first Indigenous authors to be writing romance for a major publisher, which is awesome. And considering the genre's problematic history with First Nations representation, I think it's awesome to see more authors writing in that particular genre and kind of like putting their own spin on it. And this one does seem delightful. So Ember Lee Cardinal is a liar, not full time, just kind of like part time. And, she doesn't really do it when it's important. She does lying for really good reasons. And so when her resume has been rejected for the 37th time, Ember decides to take matters into her own hands. She knows that she's qualified. She knows that she can do these jobs, but she gets the sense that the fact that she is, and this is the description from the book itself, the fact that she's Native American is standing in her way. So Emberly Cardinal lies. On the job application, she doesn't tick the box that says Native American, but instead she clicks the box that says white. And White Ember gets her dream job. White Ember gets the job in downtown Oklahoma City that she has always dreamed about. And for a while, she is thriving. She loves her job. She loves the office. She loves the work that she finally gets to do. And it really helps that the IT guy is super hot. Danu Wook Colson is a fellow native. They really get along, and he kind of helps her bend her strict no dating at work rule. Plus, kind of like forbidden romance kind of makes it a little fun up and until the point where they get caught. And then poor Ember is being blackmailed by one of her colleagues to keep their romance a secret, and all of her lies start falling down on her head. So, is Ember going to tell the truth, or is she just going to try and lie her way out of the situation again? And we will need to find out in The Truth According to Ember by Danica Nava, which is coming out on August 7th. Danica Nava is an enrolled citizen of the Chickasaw Nation. She has worked as an assistant in tech. She has a business background. So I think this is supposed to be. I mean, I'm always kind of like nervous when characters lie in books because then they have to just keep lying and the lie builds and builds and builds and builds. And there's kind of like that inherent tension in it. But it is described as a rom-com. So I think it's going to be kind of like in a funny way. And because there is like the trend of taking rom-com books and making them into movies, I'm also hoping that this one could be a Netflix special sometime soon. I think that that would be delightful. And I love that she's just kind of bringing a little bit of depth and like her experience into this genre. I love to see more diversity in romance. I love to see more own voices in romance. And so I am super, super, super looking forward to this book in August. And I'm going to be a troublemaker this time, and I'm going to give it to Virginia.
All right. Well, we're just gonna keep shifting tones then. All right. Okay. So, my next book, I don't have like it's going to be a very short sales pitch because I couldn't really find a lot about it. But I was looking through, the catalog, the upcoming books for another one of my favorite publisher, Archipelago, and coming out in May, it's this book called The Joyful Song of the Partridge by Paulina Chiziane, translated by David Brookshaw. And Archipelago comes up with these like very small, kind of like squarish kind of size books. I didn't know how I feel about that until I hold on. I'm like, oh, this is so nice to read. So even just for that reading experience, there's something about that square size that really, really works. And again, of course, they are another like champion of books in translation. So I'm always going to take a look and see what they've got. Even though I don't know a lot about the book, I know that it did win one of the most important award for literature in the Portuguese language. And the book opens with a naked woman. There is a naked woman sitting by the river near a small town. Her name is Maria das Dores. No one knows where she came from. Some say that she came in riding a crocodile. Some say she was carried in the jaws of a fish. Nobody knows how she got here, but everyone agrees that she's bad news. The townspeople see her as a bad omen. Something bad is going to happen to the town. She's going to bring misfortune to us. But who is Maria das Dores? We slowly learn her story, a woman who has fallen into hard times. As Mozambique came under Portuguese rule, her parents, like many other Black Mozambicans, were forced to assimilate. And we see how the trauma of colonization, internalized racism, how that affects Maria's family. But even though this is a story of one family, it is also the story of a whole country because they represent the hopes and dreams and the lives of all the people that live there. It is also a story about motherhood. What happens when women say, you know what? All the stuff that I have to give up because I have to become a mother, I have to become a wife, I want them back. Paulina Chiziane is the first Mozambican woman to publish a novel after the country gained independence in 1990, and her writing has been defined as political and feminist, and she's renowned for, quote, her sharp eye on the patriarchal, racist, and classist forces that bend the lives of their characters. The first book, The First Wife, A Tale of Polygamy, is also published by Archipelago. So I'm really, really excited to read that. And also this book, which is set to blend history, mythology, and grapevine chatter all in one. So coming out in May, again, this is The Joyful Song of the Partridge by Paulina Chiziane, translated by David Brookshaw. So Emma, what have we got next?
All right, my next book is kind of similar to Corinne's, another little dive into Indigenous literature. And this one is actually by a poet. So, as we learned during the poetry episode a few weeks ago, I, unlike many of my book friends present today, am actually a big fan of poetry. I like to read things that are kind of moody, kind of introspective, and I also like things that are kind of quick and consumable, especially if I'm in a reading slump. And this next pick is by a poet that's been recommended to me many times over. And I'm using this new upcoming release kind of as an excuse to officially put this person finally on my TBR. But this book is actually not a poetry collection, it's a short story collection. And what I believe is actually the short story debut by this author. And it's from Billy Ray Belcourt, and the book is titled Coexistence. This book is actually already on order at the library. So if you're interested, you can get on that holds list, just like I already am. And this one is described as a collection of intersecting stories about Indigenous love and loneliness from one of contemporary literature's most boundless minds. So Virginia mentioned earlier, she really likes stories that are kind of interconnected about people's different experiences with loneliness and isolation. So this is kind of in that same realm. So across the prairies and the West Coast, on reserves and university campuses, the characters in these stories are all looking for connection. They're learning to live with and understand one another and to see both beauty and terror side by side. Some characters featured in this collection are an aging mother who confides in her son about an intimate friendship from her girlhood, a poet who is haunted by the fact that his life is becoming a cliche, a chorus of gay men who dispense truths about their sex lives, and a man fresh out of prison finds that life on the outside has sinister restrictions of its own. So altogether, these stories paint the complex relationships that people have with each other and with society. And the characters insist on loving and desiring amid the existential terror of colonization. So these stories explore the complexity of queerness and indigeneity in the 21st century Western Canada, as is kind of the trend with Billy Ray Belcourt's work. So Billy Ray Belcourt is actually currently an assistant professor at the School of Creative Writing at UBC, so he's also a local author. And he's originally from the Driftpile Cree Nation in northern Alberta. So I've kind of noticed a trend in the books that I've been enjoying this year so far. One of my favorite reads of the year thus far has been Bad Cree, another Cree book from northern Alberta. So given that I loved that book so much, this seems like this is going to be the year that I really dive into Northern Albertan Indigenous writers. That seems to be the trend for me. So I really look forward to continuing that with reading Coexistence by Billy Ray Belcourt. And that one is also out in May. It's out May 21st. All right, I think it's time to hear from Sadie again.
All right. So the next book that I'm really looking forward to is by one of my favorite YA mystery authors that actually Corrine introduced me to years ago. I think this was pre-pandemic. Corrine talked about this author's books in one of our staff meetings, and we used to go around and talk about the books that we were reading at the time. And this was one of the books that Corrine had mentioned, and that is Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson. And Maureen Johnson has a new book coming out in August, so I do have to wait a little bit, unfortunately. But I'm very excited about Death at Morning House by Maureen Johnson. And this is a new standalone mystery. And to start out, I think it's important to say that Marlo Wexler did not mean to be an arsonist. The fire was not really her fault, but it did put an end to her date rather quickly. When your date ends with firefighters, you don't want to stick around too long. And so unfortunately, Akila, the girl that Marlo has been in love with for years, left and will never, ever go out with her again. Unfortunately, Marlo was house sitting, so it wasn't even her house that went up in flames. But now her house sitting career has literally gone up in flames, and she is needing a new job. And so she ends up at Morning House. Now, Morning House is a mansion that was built in the 1920s and abandoned shortly after that. And the job seems easy enough. You give tours. There's a very low risk of fire. There's a very high risk of getting extremely, extremely bored while she talks about stained glass and prohibition. But you know what? Given the way her summer has started, Marlo is fairly certain that this might be the best route for her. Oh, there's also the deaths. I don't know if anyone mentioned the deaths because Morning House has a secret. A few years after it was built, 2 children were found dead. The house itself was built by Dr. Philip Ralston and his wife, theater star Faye Ralston, and they lived quite a lavish and happy life. They had adopted 6 children in 1915 while working in England during the war, and they welcomed their 7th child, Max, who was 4 years ago. Now, the doctor and his wife spend most of their time in New York City, and the children are usually at boarding school. However, in the summer, they come together in their private paradise in the Thousand Islands region. And it is on this island that Dr. Ralston built a playhouse for his 7 children. Now, it is a cheerful house built of stone. It has windows of varying sizes. It's the most amazing playhouse that a child could ever wish for. However, on July 28th, in 1932, tragedy hits. The youngest child, Max, was found drowned in the waters of the St. Lawrence River. Overcome by grief, his oldest sister, Clara, jumped from the roof of their house. Now, Marlo doesn't know too much about the history of this house. However, when she arrives and the person who gave her the job and brought her here is found to be missing, Marlo realizes that the mysteries and secrets surrounding this house might be coming back a little bit. And so it is up to Marlo to figure out what is going on before history repeats itself. I think that this book is going to have a very similar vibe to Truly Devious, where you have a crime that happened many years ago, and your protagonist trying to figure out what happened so that it doesn't repeat itself. It's a kind of a very similar formula, but I think that Maureen Johnson did it well in Truly Devious, so I'm excited to kind of see how she approaches it with a new set of characters and a new story. So yeah, this is definitely one that I am really looking forward to. It's kind of my big dose of mystery. I don't always read a ton of kind of spooky mysteries, but I think Maureen Johnson just kind of hits things all in the right places for me. So yeah, so this is Death at Morning House by Maureen Johnson. And I think that is all. I will pass it back over to Virginia for now.
Yeah, I think we have got, 15? No, I cannot count. What is it? 12 books. 12 books that we have talked about today. I keep thinking we're 5 people. We always, that's still, 5 people will be 15. Anyway, 12 books. And so we have 8 more to go. And we will save that for the next week. So please tune in again. And I hope you appreciate the variety of books that we have. Corinne and I were chatting each other and saying, like, isn't that interesting that Emma was the one who represented all the Canlit today? Even Emma is not Canadian. That's great, Phil. Thank you for that. So yeah, so stay tuned for our next episode where we'll tell you about the rest of our most anticipated reads. So until then, happy reading and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.